Two fractured spirits found each other in a place where hope had nearly vanished. A battle-scarred German shepherd, abandoned in a snow-blanketed shelter, his gaze vacant, resigned to his fate, and a Navy SEAL haunted by the ghosts of war navigated the same frigid dawn, desperate for a reason to simply carry on. He hadn't come seeking a rescue, but as the dog raised a single trembling paw and made contact with his skin, a long-dormant spark ignited within them both. What unfolded next wasn't about commands or obedience. It was something akin to grace. Their story is a powerful testament that even the most shattered souls can find their way back to trust. Before we dive into their story, I'd love to know where you're joining us from. Let me know your country in the comments down below. In Willow Ridge, the winter snow never fully surrendered. It merely retreated, hiding in the shadows beneath the first rays of spring sun, casting a faint crystalline glimmer at the edge of the pine forest that stood guard over the town. The sanctuary was situated where the paved road surrendered to gravel, its ancient wooden gate sagging, as if weary from standing guard. A weather-beaten sign whispered its name, Willow Ridge Animal Sanctuary. It had the look of an old, weary farmhouse with a defiant heart, less an institution, and more a last bastion of hope. The sort of place that dug in its heels when life became unforgiving. Ethan Cole cut the engine of his truck by the fence line, its cooling metal ticking in the frigid air. He remained seated for a long moment, watching his breath cloud the windshield as an oppressive silence closed in around him. He had learned to despise the quiet. In his years as a Navy SEAL, silence was never peace. It was the breath before the world erupted in fire. Finally, he pushed the door open, the crunch of his boots on the frost shattering the stillness. Ethan was 39, with the broad shoulders of a man, forged by years of relentless training, a discipline his body refused to forget, even when his mind desperately wanted to. His short, dark brown hair was threaded with the first signs of silver at his temples, and a light beard cast a shadow over a jawline, set in a calm that was not peace. It was the stillness of survival. Faint scars traced a map near his left ear, a permanent echo of the blast that had violently concluded his final tour. His steel blue eyes held a chilling distance, the kind that comes from having witnessed more endings than any man should ever have to see. Before his knuckles could meet the wood, the sanctuary door groaned open. A woman, Maggie Hart, was silhouetted in the frame. Her frame was slight, yet anchored. She was 66. Her silver-white hair was pulled back by a worn-out rubber band. The lines on her face were a testament to a life of compassion, not just the passing of the years. And her eyes, the color of a winter sky, held a quiet, profound warmth. She was wrapped in a thick, oatmeal-colored wool cardigan, her jeans tucked into mud-splattered boots. "You must be Ethan Cole," she said. Her voice was low, each word deliberate. "The folks in Portland mentioned you were seeking someplace quiet." He simply nodded. "Quiet works." Maggie stepped aside, ushering him into a space that smelled of clean straw soap and the faint, earthy scent of animals. "The pay isn't much," she admitted, shutting the door behind him. "But I can promise you this, nobody here will ask about your past. All that matters is that you show up." "Showing up is about all I'm good for these days," he murmured almost to himself. Maggie observed him, her gaze piercing through his calm exterior to the hesitation beneath the unease in the way he stood. "I suspect there's more to you than you think, Mr. Cole. But we'll let the dogs decide." She led him down a narrow hallway adorned with photographs. Images of rescued animals, small children cradling kittens, and a much younger Maggie filled the walls. In one, she stood beside a German shepherd in a therapy vest. As they walked, the sound of barking intensified a chorus that was raw, yet pulsing with life. "There's one in particular," she began, her voice taking on a different weight. "You were bound to hear about him. His name is Ranger. 6 years old, German shepherd, an ex-military K9. He came to us from a former contractor who just couldn't manage him any longer." Ethan's steps faltered. "What's his story?" Maggie paused, pulling her cardigan around her, as if against a sudden chill. "Aggression. Trauma. We've had 3 handlers try. None of them made it past a week. He won't let a soul near him. He's been confined to that back pen for 6 months. Some days he just watches the gate as if he's waiting for someone who is never coming back. She met his gaze directly. I am not asking you to fix him, Ethan. Just make sure he's fed, and keep the other animals safe. That's the job. He nodded, but something shifted deep within his eyes. A shepherd, military trained. He knew this kind of dog, loyal beyond measure, forged in the crucible of discipline, shattered by loss. A feeling he knew all too well. Outside, the sun bled toward the horizon, casting long, mournful shadows across the snow. As they stepped into the vast open yard, a lone figure was framing a shot near the fence. A woman perhaps in her early 30s, tall and willowy, bundled in a tan coat and a thick scarf. The dying light set her chestnut hair ablaze with auburn fire. Maggie beckoned her over. Ethan, this is my granddaughter, Lily. She's home from Seattle, chasing a story about the souls who stayed behind when everyone else left. A faint, melancholic smile touched Lily's lips as she adjusted the heavy camera strap on her shoulder. It's for a feature series, The Ones Who Remained. My editor has a theory that small towns are the last honest reflection of this country. Her voice was a quiet current, a mix of the steady confidence and deep curiosity of someone who frames the world through a lens. You're the new caretaker, then just helping out, Ethan observed. Her eyes performed a swift, incisive scan of his posture, far too rigid, his movements too deliberate. Were you military? He hesitated for a heartbeat. I was. She gave a slow, understanding nod. I sensed it. You move like you're still waiting for the next order. A soft chuckle from Maggie cut through the charged air. Don't go scaring him off, Lily. He only just got here. At the kennel yard, their paths diverged. The air inside turned instantly colder, heavy with the scent of metal. Dozens of cages lined the walls, each holding a pair of eyes that followed every whisper of sound. Ethan moved with an ingrained stealth, his steps unnaturally soft, until Maggie paused before the very last pen. Inside, Ranger waited. The dog stood with a solemn stillness, a monument of quiet strength. His black and tan coat, though thick, was matted with neglect. His muscles pulled taut under a map of scars that traced a story along his flank. The tip of one ear was bent, a permanent crease from some past battle. His eyes, the color of sharp amber, locked onto Ethan with an unnerving intensity. There was a profound intelligence in his gaze, but it was clouded by a bone-deep exhaustion, the kind that instantly calculates distance, threat, and the weight of memory. He rarely barks, Maggie said, her voice a near whisper. He just watches. Ethan crouched, the unforgiving cold seeping through his jeans. He didn't dare reach out. He simply met the dog's gaze. Ranger's breathing deepened into the steady, controlled rhythm of a soldier on watch. For a long, breathless minute, neither of them moved. The very air between them felt alive, electrified with a silent understanding that was both ancient and devastatingly familiar. Ethan noticed the tremor in the dog's foreleg, a subtle spasm of muscle beside the jagged scar on its muzzle. He knew that silent dialect. Fear, defiance, loyalty, all of it fractured by profound loss. You've seen things too, haven't you? He breathed. Ranger's ears twitched. A low growl rumbled in his chest, then faded into silence. His frame went rigid, but his eyes never left Ethan's. They simply transformed. It was the kind of profound shift you witness only when recognition sparks between two broken spirits. Behind him, Maggie exhaled a soft sound in the tense air. "Well, I'll be damned," she whispered, her voice laced with disbelief. "He has never let a single soul get that close." Ethan offered no words. He simply remained where he stood, a silent statue of patience, holding that unwavering gaze until the animal's ragged breathing finally eased. Then, without warning, Ranger sat. A single scrape of claws on concrete echoed in the stillness. In that moment, Ethan felt something awaken deep within him, something he believed the desert and the passing years had buried forever. From behind him, Maggie's voice was a hushed breath of awe. He remembers something, or maybe someone. He rose with deliberate slowness, giving the dog one last respectful nod before taking a step back. Ranger didn't lunge. He didn't even growl. He simply watched as Ethan walked away. And the final image burned into Ethan's mind before he shut off the lights was of those amber eyes following him, steady and impossibly knowing, as if both man and beast had just grasped the very first delicate thread of healing. Outside, the wind had calmed, carrying the faintest scent of pine through the crisp, cold air. For the first time in years, Ethan welcomed the quiet. It no longer screamed of danger, it whispered of a beginning. Morning in Willow Ridge unveiled itself with a gentle slowness, the light filtering through the pines as if reluctant to disturb the frost that clung to every bough. The sanctuary carried the scent of fresh hay, clean soap, and the subtle, earthy musk of damp fur. For Ethan Cole, the mornings here held a stillness far removed from any battlefield he had ever known. He rose early not from restfulness, but from a deeply ingrained habit, his mind still wired for orders that no longer came. Maggie had tasked him with the feeding rotations and routine maintenance. It was straightforward labor, mending fences, cleaning pens, hauling feed, but it was honest work that kept his hands busy, which was all he had wanted. He spoke little to the other volunteers, a couple of retired locals, who regarded him with a gentle, polite curiosity. Ethan's gaze remained fixed upon the animals drawn irresistibly to the one confined behind the final gate. Ranger, the German shepherd, held his post, watching Ethan every morning from that same spot inside his kennel. He sat as still as a statue sculpted from forgotten memories. At 6 years old, he was lean, yet powerfully built. His black and tan coat now held a faint luster from steady meals, but the scars tracing his flank were indelible maps of a brutal past. His eyes, a sharp, penetrating amber, seemed to pierce through walls and see into the very heart of a man's hesitation. He never barked as Ethan drew near, never lunged at the gate. He just stared with a chilling intensity that unsettled everyone else. But Ethan wasn't like the others. He recognized that profound watchfulness. It wasn't hatred. It was the mark of a survivor. Maggie found him there that morning, her customary thermos of coffee in hand. "You seem to handle this cold better than most," she remarked. "Most men are complaining by day 3. "I've endured far worse climates," Ethan answered quietly, crouching beside Ranger's pen. Her expression softened. "That one? He's been waiting for something or someone longer than any of us can imagine. He refuses to eat unless his food bowl is placed in one exact spot. He won't rest until every light is out. Have you tried talking to him yet?" Ethan simply shrugged. "Dogs don't need our words. They just need the truth." Maggie watched him. She recognized that quiet, unshakable authority that military men carry long after they've left the service. She had known his kind before, the ones who came back from the war but never truly made it all the way home. "Truth is a powerful start," she said at last. "I just don't expect him to forgive the world in a single night." As the chill of morning slowly gave way to the light of day, Lily Hart appeared, her camera bag slung across her shoulder. Each breath she took unfurled like a white ribbon in the frigid air. Her auburn hair, full of soft waves, was pulled back in a loose ponytail, and her eyes sparkled with an insatiable curiosity. She possessed the restless energy of a person driven by the need to understand the why. After spending the morning at the local diner, where she interviewed 2 retired veterans, she had returned, determined to capture a few more photographs for her story. She discovered Ethan working on a broken latch by the storage shed. "Hey," she called out gently, careful not to startle him. "Would you mind if I took a few photographs of the kennels?" His gaze lifted for just a moment, his voice carefully devoid of emotion. "You don't need to ask me. Maggie's the one in charge here." "I already spoke with her," Lily replied, closing the distance between them. "She mentioned I'd find you here. I just thought you should know before I started pointing a lens your way." Ethan gave a slight nod, his focus returning to the bolt. "I appreciate that." A weighted silence hung in the air, as she lingered uncertain if he would open the door to conversation. You know, she began breaking the quiet. I was interviewing a veteran this morning. He told me about his dog. He said that dog saved him from making a choice he couldn't take back. His words were, "Animals carry the piece of us that still clings to life." Ethan's hand stilled. His eyes narrowed, not with anger, but with the quiet shock of a man hearing an echo from his own past. "He's not wrong about that," he murmured. "Sometimes that's all you need. Just one small thing to make you believe the world hasn't given up on you yet." In that moment, Lily studied him not with pity, but with a deep curiosity, searching for the man hidden behind the armor in his voice. "That sounds like something you know from experience." A faint, hollow smile touched his lips. "Maybe. Or maybe I'm just the guy who fills the food bowls." She let the subject drop. She had learned that soldiers share their burdens only when they are ready, and never a moment sooner. As she turned, she lifted her camera towards the far kennel, and her body went rigid. Ranger was staring at Ethan again. Through the lens, she witnessed the unmistakable shift in the dog's deep, knowing eyes. It was like a memory trying to break through the fog of instinct. That afternoon, the sky grew dark, heavy gray clouds pressing down from above. Maggie had to leave early for a neighbor who'd just lost her husband. "You two handle closing up," she'd told Ethan on her way out. "And watch Ranger. The snow's been setting him on edge." A mournful wind began to howl through the barn's high rafters, carrying a haunting whistle that sent a ripple of unease through the kennels. Ethan moved with a deliberate quiet down the aisle, securing latches and adjusting blankets. When he reached the last kennel, Ranger was pacing, his claws clicking anxiously on the concrete, his tail low, but twitching with a nervous energy. "Easy boy," Ethan murmured, his voice a low, steady anchor in the growing storm. The sound cut through the noise like a fragile promise of warmth. Ranger froze, his head snapping toward him, the dog's eyes widened, pupils shifting in the dim light. Ethan remained motionless, the words a near silent mantra. "Easy now, boy. You're okay." The change was almost imperceptible, yet undeniably real. The tension bled from Ranger's shoulders, his breaths evening out, until finally he lowered his head, not in defeat, but in a quiet acknowledgement. Ethan sank into a crouch, forearms on his knees, allowing the heavy silence to forge a bridge between them. In that profound quiet, ghosts of memory began to surface. Choking dust, the thunder of explosions, a desert sky stained the color of rust. A single bark, a warning, then a deafening void. Ethan forced his eyes open, shoving the phantoms back into the shadows. He murmured as much for himself as the dog. "You're safe now." A floorboard groaned behind him. Lily stood there, her camera hanging forgotten from her hand. I didn't mean to intrude," she breathed. "I was just leaving some notes for Maggie." Ethan never turned. "You're fine." She ventured a step closer, her voice a near whisper. "You speak to him as if you've known him forever." A dry, humorless laugh escaped him. "An old habit." Lily's gaze was fixed on the way Ranger's ears swiveled toward the sound of Ethan's voice. "He's listening to you," she observed, a note of wonder in her tone. "No one else has gotten through." "Maybe he's just worn out from the fight," Ethan answered quietly. "Or maybe he knows I understand." When she looked at him again, she didn't see the hardened soldier she had envisioned, but a man painstakingly rebuilding the fractured pieces of his own soul. "Ethan," she began, breaking the silence. "When you feel ready, I'd like to interview you for my article. Not about the fighting, but about everything that comes after." He hesitated, his gaze distant. "I'm not sure that's a story anyone wants to hear." "Perhaps not." She conceded, a fragile smile touching her lips. But they need to." Outside, the snowfall intensified, a whirlwind of white caught in the stark glare of the floodlights. Ethan's attention returned to Ranger. The animal was now settled, resting against the cold metal, watching him with an exhausted curiosity. A silent understanding in the dog's stillness pulled him forward. Ethan's eyes found a worn rubber ball on the concrete floor, a forgotten toy from another kennel, and he nudged it gently toward the bars. The ball came to a soft stop midway. Ranger's eyes tracked its movement, then darted up to meet Ethan's gaze. "Go on." Ethan breathed the words barely audible. "It's for you." An eternity seemed to pass in silence. Then with painstaking slowness, Ranger extended a paw, gently nudging the ball forward, just enough for it to roll back to Ethan's boot. It was a gesture so slight, it was almost nothing yet. It thundered in his chest like a second heartbeat. He looked down at this dog, who now sat in perfect stillness, its tail sweeping the floor once, then twice. He crouched again, his voice a low murmur. "We'll take it slow, partner. One day at a time." Lily watched from the doorway, her arms folded, a soft, knowing smile playing on her lips. In that cold, dim sanctuary, something fragile and vital had shifted. The soldier who had lost faith in second chances, and the dog who had forgotten how to trust, had just taken their first step toward meeting in the middle. The thaw was painfully slow that year. Even by the middle of March, frost still clung like a ghost to the corners of the windows, and the great pine forest held the spectral white of a lingering winter. Ethan Cole had found a strange solace in the quiet rhythm of the sanctuary, the unhurried mornings of feeding the evenings when the sky dimmed over the ridgeline like a final curtain lowering on a long-forgotten play. He rarely spoke, but the steady, predictable routine had begun to mend something fractured deep inside him. The dogs had come to trust him, or at least to accept his silent presence. And Maggie had learned that for Ethan, silence was a form of prayer. That morning found him in the training yard, a stark patch of frozen earth, surrounded by the cold mesh of a chain-link fence. He had taken it upon himself to work with the dogs that fought against obedience, the ones too haunted or stubborn for the other volunteers. At the far end of the field, a silent sentinel ranger sat and watched. The shepherd's coat was a tapestry of black and tan, gleaming in the weak sunlight, shimmering like ink spilled across an open flame. He no longer erupted into barks or lunged when people passed, but he maintained his distance, a fortress of vigilance, ever alert, listening, waiting. Ethan leaned his weight on the fence, arms crossed, his breath a pale cloud in the biting air. "Try working with one of the calmer ones first," Maggie called from behind him. She stood clutching a clipboard, bundled in her heavy coat, her silver hair tucked beneath a thick wool cap. Ethan gave a barely perceptible nod. "I need to see how he reacts to commands first." A frown tightened Maggie's features. "Be careful. He's unpredictable when he's reminded of his training." Ethan stepped into the enclosure, his movements slow, deliberate. Ranger tensed but did not move. Ethan spoke softly, his voice carrying on the still air. "Sit." The dog tilted its head unresponsive. He tried again. "Stay." Still nothing. Then, on an impulse he didn't understand, without even thinking, Ethan uttered "blibe." The word escaped him, a relic of pure muscle memory, deep and authoritative. The way a soldier's voice once sounded before the war had ravaged all its certainty. To his utter astonishment, Ranger responded at once. The shepherd went rigid, muscles coiling, then sank into a perfect sit, his head held high, eyes locked on Ethan as if awaiting his next command. Ethan's heart skipped a beat. He hadn't spoken a word of German since his deployment. Bleibe was the field command to hold position used exclusively by handlers in the thick of combat. The air lodged in his throat. "Good boy," he breathed out instinctively, his voice shaking. Maggie moved nearer, her expression a mix of confusion and concern. "What was that you just said?" she asked. Ethan didn't reply right away. He knelt, searching the shepherd's eyes. The dog's ears twitched forward, his tail still, his gaze piercing and expectant. For a fleeting instant, this wasn't a sanctuary yard. It was a sun-scorched desert, heat sand and the thunderous collapse of something in the distance. The scent of burning oil and acrid dust filled his senses again. He could feel the crackle in the air just before an explosion. Maggie's hand on his shoulder brought him back. "Ethan?" He blinked, and the vision dissolved, the cold daylight of the yard rushing back into focus. "That word," he said, his voice low, was from his training. He had no business remembering that, not after all this time. Maggie's gaze shifted between him and the dog. "You mean military training?" He gave a slow nod. "It's a handler's command, highly specific." His jaw clenched. "I used it years ago." Maggie's brow creased with concern. "You trained dogs, like him?" Ethan kept his eyes lowered. "Something like that," he mumbled. She didn't push it. She had learned long ago that the war tells its stories on its own schedule. Later that afternoon, Lily arrived back at the sanctuary, her camera slung over one shoulder and a notebook tucked beneath her arm. Her auburn hair seemed to catch fire in the fading light, her cheeks rosy from the brisk wind. She met Maggie at the gate with that familiar, warm smile. "I have the draft of the article ready," she announced. "But there's something I need to verify first." A particular name popped up in an old military briefing. A weary smile touched Maggie's lips. "You and your investigations," Maggie sighed. "What is it this time?" "Something odd." Lily produced a folded paper from her bag. Almost 7 years ago, there was a classified mission in Syria, Operation North Dune. Most of the files are blacked out, but a single line mentions a Navy SEAL handler, Cole, and his K-9 unit, both listed as missing in action. No record of recovery. Maggie went still. Lily simply nodded. "It might just be a coincidence. Cole isn't an uncommon name," but then she hesitated, her eyes softening with a flicker of doubt. "When I watched the footage of Ethan and Ranger in the yard, I saw something in the way that dog moved. It wasn't just instinct. It was the precision of intense training. I believe they've crossed paths before, even if the memory is lost to both of them." Maggie sighed, rubbing her temples wearily. "If you're right, you need to be incredibly careful. Whatever trauma he endured over there, he's only just starting to find his breath again." Lily nodded, her expression grave. "I know. I'm not trying to unearth his past, Maggie. I just need to understand." A faint, knowing smile touched the older woman's lips. "Understanding is where healing begins. But don't confuse curiosity with compassion. They aren't always born from the same heart." As twilight descended, Ethan found himself alone in the quiet of the staff cabin. A simple wooden structure, the air inside holding the faint scent of cedar and old smoke. A single lamp cast a warm glow across the table, illuminating an old leather notebook lying open. It was his field journal, a ghost he hadn't faced in years. He began to turn the brittle pages, each one filled with coordinates, cryptic entries and memories half erased by time. And then he found the entry that seized his heart. Unit K-9, Handler Division, designation R-17, status active, awaiting deployment. His throat constricted. R-17. It was his own script, his own hand. He traced the familiar letters with a trembling finger. And then he remembered. The shepherd pup he'd raised and trained from just 6 months old. Fearless, fiercely stubborn, and loyal to the bone. A dog who refused to back down even when the world was coming apart around them. He whispered the name Ranger, and the sound echoed in the silence like a long-buried confession. Outside, a sudden gust of wind rattled the shutters. From the kennels, Ranger's distant bark echoed through the night. The sharp sound cut through the cold air. A pang seized Ethan's chest, not of pain, but of profound recognition. This connection was no mere coincidence. This was the dog he had once commanded, once swallowed by the maelstrom of conflict, had somehow clawed his way back, shattered yet breathing. As dawn broke the following day, the sky above Willow Ridge glowed with a soft golden hue as the first rays of light kissed the snow. Ethan stood at the fence line, Ranger at his side, a silent, watchful presence. The dog pressed his nose against Ethan's hand, a single flick of his tail breaking the stillness. A faint smile touched Ethan's lips. "You haven't forgotten, have you?" he whispered. "Always the stubborn one you were." Lost in the moment, he was oblivious to Lily, who stood just behind him, her camera now lowered by her side. She had chosen not to press the shutter. Some moments she understood were not meant to be captured. They were meant to be held sacred. Later, back within the quiet solitude of his cabin, Ethan found himself opening the worn notebook once more, his gaze fixed on the initials etched faintly into the corner of the final page, R17. He laid his palm over the inscription, his words a nearly soundless murmur. "You made it home, buddy, and I'll never forget what I owe you." Outside, the grip of winter was finally loosening as the snow began to melt, dripping from the eaves in a slow, steady rhythm, as if the world itself was learning to breathe again. In the week that followed the discovery in Ethan's old field notebook, a fragile sense of calm settled over everything, the kind of stillness that precedes a great thaw. A heavy blanket of snow still clung to the ridges encircling Willow Ridge, but its edges were surrendering, softening into a weary gray slush. Each morning a veil of mist drifted through the forest, carrying with it the clean scent of pine and the promise of melting ice. For the first time in what felt like a lifetime, Ethan felt a pull to go outside, a desire born from something other than a sense of duty. He started taking Ranger for walks far beyond the familiar sanctuary grounds, following a narrow, winding trail that descended toward an old wooden bridge spanning a half-frozen creek. The bridge groaned under their combined weight, its ancient planks rimmed with frost. For the first few days, Ranger would falter at its edge, his claws scraping against the wood, his entire body trembling. Every sharp crack of the ice below sent a shudder through him, his ears flattening, his tail tucked tight. But Ethan never pushed him. He simply waited by the dog's side, a gloved hand resting gently on Ranger's neck. "It's okay," he would say, his voice low and steady. "We're not back there anymore." The dog's breath plumed in the cold air, a fragile white cloud. For a fleeting moment, Ethan was transported back to the searing desert heat, the blinding sandstorms, the deafening roar of mortars, and the familiar, chilling hum of fear in his own chest. He knew that tremor in Ranger intimately. It was a ghost from his own past, a trembling that would seize his hands in the deafening silence. Each day was a battle, a few more feet gained across the divide. By the week's end, a fragile progress had been made. Ranger could now reach the halfway point before his courage faltered, his gaze locking with Ethan's, searching for a strength he couldn't find alone. "We will get there." Ethan would murmur, his voice a low promise, one single step at a time. Back at the sanctuary, Maggie Hart was orchestrating what she called their open day. It was a weekend event for the town to come to offer donations, and just maybe to open their homes. The sanctuary gates hadn't opened for an event like this since before the world changed. Maggie, with her storm-gray eyes and an optimism that refused to be broken, was certain the time had come. "This town needs a reminder of what hope looks like on four legs," she declared, her voice firm, as she fastened handmade signs along the fence line. Lily threw herself into helping organize, weaving the event into the very fabric of her story. Her presence was a current of energy that electrified every space she entered. With a camera in one hand and a notebook in the other, wisps of her hair constantly escaped their ponytail, catching the light like spun gold as she spoke with volunteers. More than once, Ethan found himself frozen, watching her from the periphery, captivated by the genuine warmth she offered to complete strangers. She was like the first sunlight touching a frozen river, gentle yet relentless in its promise to break through the ice. The morning of the event arrived with a fragile, clear sky, but a cold that cut to the bone. A line of cars snaked down the gravel road outside the sanctuary. Families, their children swallowed by thick coats, wandered between the enclosures. The sound of their laughter served as a bright counterpoint to the chaotic chorus of barks. Maggie directed the flow of people with the calm authority of someone who had commanded through far worse storms. Ethan, meanwhile, stood as a silent guardian by Ranger's pen, ensuring a buffer of safety. Children pressed their faces to the wire mesh, their breath fogging in the cold, their small fingers pointed. "Is he a mean one?" A little boy whispered, his hand clutching his mother's sleeve. Ethan knelt down to their level. "He's just scared," he said, his voice quiet. Sometimes when a soul has been deeply hurt, they build walls to protect themselves until they learn it's safe to let them down again. The mother offered him a faint, knowing smile, appreciating his grace. The boy's eyes widened with understanding, and he whispered, "Like a superhero after a really bad mission." A soft chuckle escaped Ethan. "Yeah, something exactly like that." From a distance, Lily framed the moment with her camera. Through her lens, she saw the hard lines of Ethan's face soften as he spoke to the child. It was a fragile warmth, a flicker of light piercing through the soldier's heavy armor. She lowered her camera, lost in thought. By noon, the sanctuary was alive with a gentle, hopeful energy. Local vendors had opened a small stall, the scent of hot cocoa and cookies drifting on the air as Maggie moved through the crowd like a watchful matriarch. An older man named Walter, a retired truck driver with a life etched into his face and a gap-toothed smile, offered to mend one of the failing heaters. "Can't let the pups be freezing their little tails off," he said, his grin full of warmth. His simple kindness struck Ethan a reminder that gentleness still existed in places the war had not yet spoiled. As the afternoon light began to thin, snow resumed its descent, soft and unhurried. A group of school children huddled near Ranger's pen. Among them was a little girl, Abby maybe 7 years old, small and fair-haired, in a bright red coat and mismatched mittens. She had a sweet gap in her front teeth, and a way of speaking to animals as if they shared a secret language. "Hi, doggy," she whispered carefully, pushing a small cookie through the fence. Ranger didn't move at first, just a cautious sniff. Maggie's voice called out from across the yard. "Careful, sweetheart, he's still learning how to trust." But Abby only smiled. "That's okay, I have time." She turned her head slightly, stepping back to give Maggie a little wave. And in that exact moment, her boot hit a slick patch of ice. She slipped, falling backward with a sharp, startled cry. The crowd let out a collective gasp. The sound was a sudden crack, like a branch snapping, and Ranger's reaction was terrifyingly instantaneous. The shepherd surged forward, a blur of coiled muscle, his claws scraping the concrete. Ethan barely unlatched the gate before the dog shot past him. He bounded across the yard, aimed directly at the child. For a terrible frozen moment, everyone held their breath. Maggie shouted. Lily dropped her camera, and a father grabbed for his daughter. But Ranger wasn't lunging to attack. He skidded to a halt beside Abby, positioning his body between her and the frozen ground. Front legs braced, a living shield blocking her from danger. The little girl sat blinking, stunned, but completely unharmed. Ethan rushed over his breath, hanging like a ghost in the cold air. His approach slowed his voice, a low murmur against the tension. "Easy now, boy. You did good." Ranger remained frozen for a long moment before his gaze shifted back to Ethan. The dog's chest rose and fell in ragged breaths, and then a single tentative wag broke the spell. Abby let out a soft giggle, patting his shoulder. "See, he's a brave boy." A wave of relieved laughter washed over the crowd, shattering the stillness. Maggie finally let out a breath, her hand pressed tight against her heart. "Good heavens," she whispered. "That animal just took 10 years off my life." Lily had raised her camera again, but her finger never touched the shutter. She understood this image unfolding before her wasn't a moment to capture, but a memory to hold. She watched the look that settled on Ethan's face, a quiet, profound pride mingled with utter disbelief. Much later, after the last visitor had departed, and the forgotten cocoa grew cold, Ethan found himself on the porch steps of the kennel. Ranger was beside him, his heavy head resting on Ethan's boots. The sky had softened into the pale, bruised colors of twilight, casting the world in hues of deep blue and gold. "You did something incredible today," Ethan said, his voice barely a whisper. "Terrified half the town, but you did it." Ranger's tail thumped once against the weathered wood. A faint, knowing smile touched Ethan's lips. "Oh, I guess we're both learning how to face the bridges we've been avoiding." From the doorway, Maggie watched her breath misting in the cold. "He's not the only one making the journey," she said softly. "You're walking across too, Ethan, even if you can't see it yet." Ethan offered no reply. His gaze drifted past the tree line to the dark, skeletal frame of the bridge looming in the distance. The fresh snow there glowed faintly in the dying light. He thought of every time he'd stood right there, halfway paralyzed by the fear of moving forward. Maybe true healing wasn't about erasing the past. Maybe it was about finding the strength to walk alongside it. He reached down his hand, coming to rest on the thick fur of Ranger's neck. "All right, partner," he whispered. "We still have a long road ahead." And together, as the snow began to fall once more, they stood and faced the silent bridge waiting for them in the distance. The snow had returned, with the evening descending in a sacred hush that seemed to absorb every sound in town. Willow Ridge was now cloaked in a deep, dreamlike white. The world was utterly muted, save for the rare groan of ice settling on the rooftops. Ethan Cole was making his final solitary rounds at the sanctuary, the silence his only companion, securing the kennel latch as the dog finally drifted into a troubled sleep. Ranger was coiled within his pen, his head tucked between his paws, ears flicking at the whisper of the wind. Ethan had seen it for a while now. The shepherd never truly slept soundly, as though deep rest was a peace he felt he didn't deserve. Maggie had left early after an exhausting day at the clinic, and Lily was downtown reporting on a winter fundraiser for the town's fire department. Without them, the sanctuary was hollow, steeped in an unnerving silence. Ethan walked the dimly lit corridors, the sharp clap of his boots on concrete, the only sound. He was just considering calling it a night, when the first wail tore through the darkness. It rose from the direction of town, a long metallic shriek, sharp and piercing, climbing and then collapsing, its echo haunting the hills. The noise cut through the heavy, snow-muted silence like a razor. Ranger's entire body went taut. His head snapped up, ears pinned, his eyes wild with a sudden raw terror. Then a second siren screamed, closer now, and with that came flashing crimson lights that painted the snow in brutal, pulsing strokes. "Hey, Ethan," Non whispered, moving toward him. "It's okay." But it wasn't okay. To Ranger, that sound wasn't just a siren. It was a memory clawing its way to the surface. The shepherd scrambled to his feet, his claws scrabbling against the floor, his tail clamped low in fear. A guttural bark erupted from him, a sound born of pure primal terror, and he threw himself against the gate, the force of it shattering the lock. Before Ethan could even reach for him, the dog vanished, a dark streak against the swirling white. Ethan's heart pounded against his ribs. "Ranger," he yelled, his feet already carrying him toward the door. He burst outside, and the cold struck him like a physical blow. Snow whipped around him in blinding sheets, the wind clawing through his jacket. He could hardly see more than a few feet in front of his face. The sirens grew louder, their screams ricocheting off the surrounding hills, distant yet somehow all-consuming. It was the kind of sound that made every nerve ending remember a battlefield. He raced down the path, his boots sinking into the drifts, desperately tracking the faint paw prints that cut a frantic path toward town. His breath plumed in sharp, ragged bursts, clouding the frigid air. Up ahead he could hear a dog barking, a frantic, desperate sound. It was Ranger's voice, thick with terror and confusion. By the time Ethan finally made it to the bridge, a fire seared his lungs. He glimpsed a movement through the swirling snow. It was Ranger, poised halfway across the bridge, trembling, his eyes wide with terror, every muscle pulled taut. The crimson glow of the sirens flickered across his fur like hellfire. He looked utterly lost, a soul cornered by ghosts. "Ranger!" Ethan's voice tore through the air, his feet stopping at the precipice of the bridge. The dog's head snapped toward the sound, but the sirens shrieked again, and Ranger recoiled, his claws scraping violently against the wood. The ancient boards groaned ominously beneath his weight. One false move, and the icy water below would claim him. Ethan willed himself to breathe. The soldier deep inside him, the man forged in command, took over. He moved forward, steady and deliberate, ignoring the biting wind that made his eyes water. "It's me, buddy," he set, his voice a low anchor. "You're safe. You hear me?" "You're safe." A low, uncertain whine escaped Ranger. his body quaked, tail tucked, head hanging low. The siren screamed on. The sound twisted something raw deep inside Ethan's chest. He recognized that panic, the utter helplessness of being trapped between memory and a horrifying reality. He drew a sharp breath and then shouted, his voice deep, commanding, a primal instinct unleashed. "Blime!" The word cut through the chaos of the night like a signal flare. Ranger froze instantly, his muscles locking. For a single suspended heartbeat, the world held its breath. Then Ethan saw it, a flicker of recognition in the shepherd's haunted eyes. The old ingrained training, the bond buried beneath years of heartache and distance. "Good boy," Ethan whispered, inching closer. "It's all right now." The wind howled a mournful song through the trees. Ranger whimpered one last time, and then he began to move. Slow, hesitant steps carried him across the slick, treacherous bridge. The moment he reached Ethan, the dog buried his head into the man's chest, trembling uncontrollably. Ethan fell to his knees, wrapping both arms around his friend's shaking body. "Easy, easy," he murmured, his own voice cracking with emotion. The dog's heart hammered against his ribs, a fast and desperate rhythm, until finally it began to slow. Somewhere far behind them, the angry glow of a massive fire painted the low-hanging clouds. The old warehouse near the edge of town had been consumed by flames. A crowd of fire trucks filled the street, their lights spinning in a silent, frantic dance. Ethan could hear faint shouts carried on the wind. He stayed right where he was, holding Ranger tight, as the falling snow melted into their clothes, a cold baptism in the midst of the storm. They were a portrait against the cold, illuminated by the fire's distant, flickering light. 30 minutes later, Lily arrived, camera gear slung heavy over her shoulder, her breath hanging in sharp white puffs. A fine dusting of snow covered her coat, her cheeks crimson from the frantic run. She had been documenting the warehouse inferno when Maggie's call came through, a desperate report that Ethan had gone after the dog. She finally saw them near the bridge. Man and dog both drenched and utterly still beneath the falling snow. The sight struck her with the force of something sacred. She didn't hesitate, pulling out her phone and hitting record. The footage was starkly simple. A soldier kneeling in the snow, whispering to a trembling dog under the wash of flashing emergency lights. The sirens shrieked, but neither of them moved an inch. When she uploaded the clip to the local news portal later that night, she titled it, "The Night the Dog Came Home." By morning, the video had woven its way through the town's heart. The comments poured in from people who knew Ethan from the diner or the hardware store. Old veterans saw a reflection of something they had felt, but had never found the words to say. One message pierced through the rest. "That wasn't a rescue. That was redemption." Maggie watched the clip in her office, her hand pressed hard against her mouth. She wiped a tear from her eye before she went out to find them. She discovered Ethan on an overturned crate, inside the sanctuary's storage barn, Ranger lying faithfully on a blanket beside him. The fire's faraway glow pulsed through the cracks in the old wood, casting stripes of warmth across their still faces. "You should see it," Maggie said, her voice soft. "The whole town is talking about you two." Ethan looked up, his features etched with exhaustion, but a deep calm settled over him. "We just got lost for a while," he said. "Found our way back." Ranger stirred, lifting his head. His eyes were softer now, the jagged edge of his fear smoothed away by trust. Ethan reached down, brushing a hand gently through his fur. "We're all right," he whispered almost to himself. "We're not fighting anymore." Outside, the last siren faded into the deep night, leaving behind only the sound of the wind moving through the trees. The snow had finally started its slow, grudging retreat from Willow Ridge. Patches of green appeared timidly along the fence lines, and water began to trickle through ditches where ice had once reigned supreme. A dampness hung in the air, the scent of melting snow and pine promising an end to winter's harsh grip. For Ethan Cole, the days had begun to feel less heavy, but a profound quietness held the ghost of something left unresolved. The viral video of him and Ranger had faded from the world's memory, yet the people in this small town still acknowledged him with a wave as he passed. They no longer saw just a man with his dog. They saw a living testament to second chances. Then, on a bleak and overcast morning, Maggie appeared at the sanctuary, a small bundle of mail clutched beneath her arm. Her woolen coat was dotted with a fine mist, her face flushed from the biting cold. She extended a stark white envelope toward Ethan, the official seal of the Navy pressed into the corner. "This just arrived for you," she murmured, her voice low. "It's certified." A deep furrow formed on Ethan's brow. Years had passed since he'd received any correspondence from the Navy. The envelope felt unnervingly crisp, its official nature suggesting a message of consequence. He retreated to his Spartan office, a simple wooden desk, one chair, one lamp, and sank into his seat. His hands paused, hesitating for a beat before finally breaking the seal. Within lay a single sheet of paper bearing the formal letterhead of the Department of the Navy. He started to read, his voice barely a whisper. "Staff Sergeant Ethan Cole, United States Navy SEAL retired. Pursuant to a recent audit and data retrieval from inactive K-9 Division archives, the K-9 unit designated R-17 Ranger has been positively identified via subdermal DNA chip correlation. Millions." The official record confirms the unit's assignment under your direct command during Operation North Dune, Syria 2016. The asset was previously listed as missing in action subsequent to the detonation of an improvised explosive device which resulted in a loss of contact with your unit. This communication serves as an official acknowledgement of recovery and the formal recognition of his service connection. You are by this letter granted the full authority to assume permanent custody should you so desire. Signed, Arito, Lieutenant Commander Charles Vance, United States Navy K-9 Liaison. For a long, silent moment, Ethan just stared at the page. His jaw clenched, a raw ache tightening his throat. The letter trembled in his grasp. R-17. He breathed the sound, barely audible. The designation he had etched into the cover of an old notebook. The number he was certain had been lost to time forever. Ranger was his dog. He was his partner before the deafening blast that entombed a part of their unit beneath a crushing avalanche of concrete. Ethan was the only one they pulled out alive. He'd spent years forcing himself to believe Ranger had perished with the others, because that was a simpler pain than imagining his partner dying afraid and alone. Now the truth stared back at him in black ink. Ranger had survived, propelled by instinct, by memory, and by some unbreakable, unseen cord that connected their souls. He breathed out, slow and deep, folding the worn letter. For the first time in a decade, his eyes burned, not with grief, but with the searing grace of release. That afternoon, Lily came back to the sanctuary clutching her notebook and a small voice recorder. She wore a pale gray trench coat tied loosely around her, and her chestnut hair, now longer, just brushed her shoulders. She carried a quiet confidence now, the kind earned by witnessing real pain and finding the words to honor it. She spoke with Maggie first, their exchange warm and easy. Before approaching Ethan, where he stood by the fence, Ranger a steady presence at his side. "I heard about the letter," she said softly. He just nodded, his gaze unwavering on the dog. "Yeah, turns out he wasn't just another stray." "I know," she whispered back. "Dieu, I requested to read the service report. They confirmed he was yours, that you were his handler." Ethan's voice was barely audible. "It's a strange feeling. Like meeting a ghost, only to realize it's been breathing this whole time." They started walking slowly along the fence. The sound of snow melting dripped from the roof, and in the pines the first birds of the thaw began to tentatively sing. Lily switched her recorder off, slipping it into the deep pocket of her coat. "Ethan," she said, stopping him, "I was supposed to ask you questions for the follow-up story, but I think what I really need to know isn't about Ranger. It's about you." A faint, weary smile touched his lips. "That's treacherous ground." "Perhaps," she answered, a real smile warming her face. "But you once told me that dogs don't need words, only truth. I have to believe people aren't all that different." For a long, heavy moment, he said nothing. When he finally found his voice, it was steady but frayed with the memory of pain. That day in Syria, our unit was clearing an abandoned compound. Intel swore it was empty. It wasn't. When the first blast hit, my hearing just vanished for a few seconds. Everything turned to white. Ranger was trained to pull me to cover if things went south, but I just waved it off. I thought my way was better. I ordered him forward, and then the second blast hit. He stopped, his breath turning to mist in the cold. After that, it's all a blur. They told me I was fortunate, but I never felt it. All I could think was, if I'd never given that command, maybe it would have been me lying there, not them. Lily just listened, her gaze unwavering as her eyes began to well up. "Ethan," she whispered, "you can never go back and change that moment, but you can choose what to do with the time you have now." His gaze fell to Ranger, who was now pressed firmly against his leg, those amber eyes looking up with such steadfast devotion. "I think he already chose for me," Ethan breathed. A faint smile touched Lily's lips. Maybe that's the truest form of courage, not facing down death, but choosing to face life again. They stood together in the stillness, the wind whispering through the pines. And for the first time in what felt like a lifetime, Ethan didn't flinch. Later, as evening settled in, he walked into Maggie's office. A fire was crackling inside the stove, casting a warm glow across the small room. Maggie was at her desk, her glasses perched on her nose as she sorted through paperwork. Her eyes lifted as Ethan stepped inside, a folded letter in his hand. "I've made my decision," he stated, his voice clear. She nodded towards the empty chair. "Have a seat, soldier." A slight smile touched his lips as he did. The Navy called. "They confirmed Ranger is officially mine. They're just waiting on my signature for permanent custody." A softness entered Maggie's eyes. "It's about damn time someone did." Ethan laid the papers on her desk. "Would you witness the signature?" "It would be my honor," she replied, pushing the form toward him. He picked up the pen, his hand hovering for just a second, and then he signed. Handler E. Cole. The black ink seemed to anchor itself to the page, the letters resolute and permanent. He passed it back to her, a long breath escaping his lips. "Guess that makes us partners again." Maggie's smile was warm. "You always were." Outside, the last light of the sun had vanished from the horizon, leaving the sky bruised with purple and gold. Ethan stepped into the cool night air, Ranger moving in sync beside him. The dog pressed against his leg for a moment, a silent support, the way soldiers brace one another when all the words have been said. Ethan raised his eyes to the skyline. Through the clinging mist, the bridge's faint outline was a ghost on the horizon. His hand found Ranger's head scratching gently behind an ear. "We're home," he breathed. "Bud." "Both of us." In response, the shepherd canted his head, a soft, knowing exhale escaping him. As one, they moved down the path, the day's fading light casting a gentle glow upon the last vestiges of snow. Two souls scarred, but surviving. Finally understanding that home wasn't a place, but the presence of the one still standing beside you after the war is over. Spring crept back into Willow Ridge, a release of breath held too long. The final remnants of winter dissolved, melting into quiet streams that nourished the awakening pine roots, feeding the earth that had lain frozen for months. The air filled with the scent of damp soil and the promise of life renewed. At the town's edge, the old Willow Ridge Animal Rescue was undergoing its own transformation. Its weathered sign was gone, replaced by a freshly painted one bearing a new name, Willow Ridge Therapy Center. And underneath, a quiet inscription added, "For veterans and their companions." Ethan Cole stood near the fence that morning, a profound stillness about him. A gentle wind stirred the fabric of his green-gray navy jacket. He'd traded the haunting silence of mere